Hi, I'm Sam Bear from Class Winners Collector Vehicles, and today we're in the workshop garage talking about batteries. We just brought out this 1987 Jaguar XJS Hessen-Eisenhardt convertible. It's a 12-cylinder car out of long-term storage for a client, and we're preparing to sell it. The battery that was in it was dead, and when we went to go get a new battery for it, we were hearing questions at the Costco Battery Center, and we're reminded of all the questions that we get about batteries and how such a seemingly simple concept becomes so convoluted and people get so scared about it. There's 12 volts, there's 6 volts, there's positive ground, there's negative ground, there's lead acid and AGM. It's enough to make your hair fall out if you're uninitiated. Let's cut through it. It's really simple. In the good old days, like with this 1955 Ford Thunderbird, cars relied on 6-volt batteries. And with generators, they were generally positive ground. But by the mid-50s, cars were starting to use a lot more accessories, and 6 volts just simply weren't enough to crank increasingly powerful engines in cold temperatures. So in the mid-50s, they went to 12 volts, still positive ground, until those alternators came in starting in about 1960, 1961. Starting in the 1960s and going through the 70s and pretty much for a lot of manufacturers in the 80s, the ubiquitous top post 12-volt battery was really just the standard. It's a lead acid battery up here in front, clamp it on and go. General Motors was a proponent of using the side post terminal battery. Makes it a little bit harder to get clamps on there, but it's still the same concept. This seems like a really great time to dispel some age-old myths and answer questions that just keep coming up, and we hear them all the time. The first is lead acid versus AGM battery. AGM is absorbent glass mat, also known as a gel battery. Most people just call them Optimas because that's the brand that made them very popular. Do you need an AGM or an Optima? Probably not. The primary benefits of an AGM battery are quite simple. Because there's no water sloshing around, you can actually mount them sideways or upside down. So they're great for where you need a lot of vibration or tricky mounting positions like race cars. In a standard car, you really don't need them. And the myths surrounding them, they'll give you better performance, they're more cost effective because they last so much longer. It's just not true. And in fact, the battery that was in the 1987 Jaguar was, in fact, an Optima red top. It was 10 years old and it was dead. Now, the battery in this 86 Ferrari 328 GTS, it's about 15 years old, and it's just a run-of-the-mill lead acid battery, and it just keeps working. So if the cost is 2 to 1, a lead acid versus a AGM, you're far better off with a lead acid if you don't plan on mounting it sideways or upside down. Now, the other confusion is cranking amps and cold cranking amps. How many do I need? Quite simply, cold cranking amps means the amount of amps that flow over 30 seconds of cranking at 0 degrees Fahrenheit. Cranking amps is the same, just at 32 degrees or freezing, because the colder it is, the harder the battery has to work. The rule of thumb is you need 1 cold cranking amp per cubic inch. unless you're running a high compression engine, like a diesel or like a race-built 427 Corvette or something like that. So this has 825 cold cranking amps. That's pretty much overkill for most. And let's face it, most people aren't driving their classics or their high compression sports cars in freezing weather anyways. So why do they make so many different types of batteries when you go in there? Dozens of them of different types. And which one do you pick? Well, it's simple. Basically, you just need a 12-volt battery that will fit. And as you can see, to get this car going, we actually used a 12-volt battery out of the Mercedes, and it doesn't really fit. We had to turn it all cockeyed just to get the posts and terminals to mate up. But what we really need is just something like this. And it should just fit in there. Either of them will get them going. This one just fits in the space that Jaguar provided for us. And you don't need to be an expert to replace a battery. I mean, it's about as simple as it gets. It's usually a 1/2 inch or a 13 millimeter, and simply unscrew the terminal, start with a negative, go to the positive, get the old one out. Positive terminal, contact, negative terminal, and then just clamp her down. So you see, K vehicles from Japan tend to have these really puny batteries with these tiny posts on them. You're not going to find those in a standard automotive battery in the United States. So people are always on news groups and asking questions of other owners. Well, what do I do? Simple. These are just 12-volt batteries. Run into the automotive shop and find any small car battery that'll fit in here. And then buy a set of these. They're just terminal connectors, and you undo the posts here, clip off the wires, take off a little insulation, and then simply bolt it into this, and like magic, you have a JDM vehicle that can fit really the smallest and least expensive batteries that you can buy in the US market. And it'll run perfectly. And the best thing that you can do for your battery, and for your wallet for that matter, is get something like a battery tender, a float charger, a maintainer, and keep it hooked up to the battery in your car when you're not using it for more than a week. This way you'll keep the battery, no matter what type of battery it is, topped up and ready for when you need it next. You see, modern cars, they have all types of computers and sensors and accessories that will continue to draw power even when you're not using it. So if you let it sit, a $200 battery can be flat within a month. So spend the money, keep your battery healthy for, well, at least a decade, if not a couple decades. I'm Sam Barer, and for all of us at Class Winners, do it yourself. It's fun, you get to learn, and the results, well, they're pretty rewarding.